Hi again, everyone. Tonight we're going to be looking at TinkerCad and making designs for 3D printers. TinkerCad is a free and easy to use website. It's made by the same company that makes AutoCAD. It's called Autodesk. And TinkerCAD is simply using shapes and different colors and combining shapes, and also using negative shapes, or what we simply call a hole, to actually design things. Some of our learning goals as we get into this, beginning to understand how to design in 3D. It's a little tricky to sometimes design 3D shapes and 3D objects using a 2D screen. So there's going to be a few things that we need to think about. Some things for us to know. We're probably familiar with an x-axis, and we're probably familiar with a y-axis. We use those on most of our graphs that we've done either in high school or even some of the graphs that we do in elementary school. The challenge is for us to think about things in the z-axis. So when we think of x and y, those are nice and flat surfaces. The z-axis is what gives us height. And we need to start thinking about 3D shapes instead of 2D shapes. So we can't think of circles. We need to think of cylinders or spheres. We can't think of a rectangle or a square. We need to think of a box. We can't think of a triangle. We need to think of a triangular prism or different types of pyramids. The other task that we often need to think about is how big is a millimeter? We're going to be measuring in millimeters, and we need to think about how big 5 millimeters is, or how big 10 millimeters is, or when we get down to the small ones, how big is a millimeter? So maybe even take a moment with your fingers and just try to space between your finger and your thumb how big you think 1 millimeter might be, and also maybe how big you think 10 millimeters might be, and then even try to go to 30 millimeters, just so we have an idea of scale and how big things we will be designing are. Something else for us to think about as we get designing, the color on the screen doesn't match your print job. So the color on our screen, when we get into TinkerCAD, and there'll be another video for how to use TinkerCAD, doesn't actually match the color that's going to be printed out in. It's just a design color. The color that it gets printed in is actually predetermined on the 3D printer. We can load what we call a spool of filament. A spool of filament looks a lot like kind of a weed whacker filament of that plastic. So again, the tough thing for us to think about is thinking in a z-axis. So we're pretty good at the x and the y. Shapes, holes, letters, and more. We're going to get into a screen in a little bit in the next video. It's going to look a lot like this. There's a variety of pieces, shapes, and letters that we can place. We can stretch them. We can drop and drag them. So we don't have to get so precise in our designing. You'll also find out how we can get into a shape and make it a precise size by typing in the measurement that we want. Any shape can be a hole or a solid. So I can drag any of these shapes on, and when I'm on that shape and I have it selected, and you'll see up here when we get into TinkerCAD in a few minutes, it can be made a hole or it can be made a solid. I can also change the color here. Again, the only reason you don't want to change your color is more for organizational purposes on your screen. We're also going to find that shapes can be grouped and ungrouped. So I can put two shapes together, but if I move one of those shapes, only the one moves and the other one stays there. I can group shapes when I know that I'm done with how I want them to be grouped or how I want them to be combined. Shapes can be rotated. Rotating is a bit tricky, and it's sometimes confusing when we get into our 3D view with rotating. Shapes can also be aligned or mirrored. So we can position things perfectly, or we can mirror it to have the opposite of that shape. If I want to put shapes together, they must be touching. So if I want to combine or group shapes, shapes can also be duplicated. So if I needed 10 of a certain shape, I would make one, and then I would copy and paste it. Designs. When we get into designing and into TinkerCAD, designs should be named and saved so you can tinker with them later. Your shapes in all of your designs will get saved in the cloud in TinkerCad, so you don't need to worry about saving them to a flash drive or your computer. Designs can be private, or you can publicly share them. Designs can be printed in one color. There are some printers that have multiple colors, and you can do multiple color designs. But we're going to be designing ours to be printed in one color. And designs should be fun, and designing should be fun. Something else for us to think about as we get into more intricate designs, if that's what you choose. Sometimes the printer will have to put in supports. We'll talk more about supports as we get into designs. Our design of a name tag will not need any supports. It'll just be nice and flat on the printer, and it'll be designed so that it prints off quickly and it prints off really well. We're going to be getting into making a name tag. And here's just some exemplars of name tags that we've seen made. So here we have more of a sports theme. Here we have a really simple rectangular with rounded corners name tag. And here we have one very similar to the one that we're going to make. So I'd like you to just maybe pause the video, think about what shapes you see in the Burnley, the Bryson, or the Bowman name tags. And now that we're back, if we take a look at this name tag, I'd like you to look and see that there's actually a square or a box right here. And then here, we're going to have a cylinder. We're going to do another box inside of here to get the cutout. You can see how a part of that box is cut out. We have text. And then also we just have a cylinder that is a hole. So if we think of those shapes again, we have a rectangle or a box because we think in 3D shapes. We have a cylinder that gets combined with that box. We have another rectangle or another box that goes in here that is going to be a cutout or a hole. This hole, so this box that's going to become a hole where our name gets in, will be raised off of the working plane. And you'll see what I mean by that as we get into TinkerCad and as we start to look at it. And then we're going to put our text in. We have a text tool for that. Not a lot of font choices, but we do have a few choices. And then we have this opening for your keychain or whatever you want to put it on, and that is simply a box or a cylinder that we put in and we make it a hole. So we're going to wrap this video up. We're going to get into TinkerCAD and we're going to have a look at how to design these, how to name these, and also how to send them to me so that I can get them printed for you.